Kiss the mic. So welcome everybody. It's great to have you here for our Cowiche Canyon Conservancy Yakima Valley College Winter Speaker Series. I'm Matthew Lozier. I teach in biology here, and it's wonderful to gather again for this winter quarter where we'll share a number of amazing stories of our amazing environment where we live. So, and I'm particularly interested in tonight's speaker. Yakima Valley College runs a summer research program, and we had the good fortune a couple summers ago to have two students, Anakin and Rain, working with the team that was collecting some of these beautiful pollinators. So it's, I'm excited to see some of the results. So a few things to say. I want to thank YVC for hosting this. Thank you to the leadership at YVC for making this happen. Our conference staff here and community relations have played a big role in creating this space. So thank you for the opportunity. If you have a cell phone that you think might go off, please take this opportunity to quiet it. Thank you so much for that. And this could not happen without the hard work of Cy Philbrick. So Cy, come on up and let's get it going.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Yakima Valley College, for hosting us, and tech staff for putting together such a beautiful space for us, and hopefully good sounding space. I just have a few housekeeping announcements before we get started. So first and foremost, most importantly, Cowiche Canyon Conservancy is hiring. We're hiring for two different positions currently, a conservation and recreation program manager, and an education and community outreach coordinator. So if you enjoy this ecosystem, and want to get involved in a meaningful way, these are opportunities. So spread the words to your friends and networks. This is, it's a good opportunity to get involved with this organization. So one of the reasons we put on these talks, as Matthew often says, is both to show that science and research happens here, is still happening in Central Washington. Science is still happening, folks, in Central Washington. And just to show some of the cool stuff that local researchers are doing. And also, one of the reasons that we put on these talks is just to enlarge our circle of care. So trying to think beyond our human connections and think a little bit about who else we relate to in this world, so what other critters we relate to, what other critters we might want to pay attention to. And part of the hope here is that you come away from tonight just with some ideas about how you might relate to some non-human creatures in a new way. So we have three talks as part of this winter talk series. First tonight is on native bees. We have two more coming up. There's a little bit of a gap between this one and the next one. The next one is on February 24th, also a Tuesday, on plastics in our river systems. And the next one after that is on March 3rd, a little bit more of a positive story on the movement to remove dams in the Northwest and locally. Tonight, without further ado, our speaker is Caleb Lankford. Caleb comes to us from the Washington Department of Agriculture, where he is the volunteer coordinator for the Washington Bee Atlas program. And if you're interested after tonight in getting involved, Caleb will be in that corner over there, very willing to talk to you about getting involved with the Bee Atlas and how you can learn more about native bees in our habitat. So without further ado, Caleb.
Hi, y'all. I also want to echo those thank yous. Thank you to YVC for hosting us tonight, and to Cy for inviting me to come and give this talk. You'll hear in my bio in a little bit that I used to be a teacher before this role. So I'm quite comfortable in front of crowds, but I've learned that in this new role, my crowds are suddenly more attentive and all looking at me. And so I'm like, wow, this is a full room. I'm a little nervous. But thank you so much for being here. I'm a huge nerd, and I love bees, so I'm excited to share with you all about bees. They gave me a microphone, so that's what I'm doing. So where's the buzz? Mapping native bees using participatory science. Like I said, I work for the Department of Agriculture here in Yakima, the State Department of Agriculture, and I work on a very special project called the Washington Bee Atlas. So tonight we're going to chunk the presentation sort of into 3 parts. First, we're going to talk about what are native bees, and we're going to clear up some misconceptions that people have about bees. And then we're going to look at the program and ask what do we do, and I'll walk you through sort of what our volunteers are out there doing to map native bees. And then lastly, the fun part, we had the privilege of surveying on some CCC lands this past year. So we're going to take a look at some of the bees that we caught there, some very preliminary results of a summer's worth of sampling at Cowiche Canyon Conservancy. So who am I? I'm not originally from Washington, is what I'll say. In fact, on Thursday, it's my 1-year anniversary of starting this role, so I'm thrilled to be here. Prior to that 1-year anniversary just prior. I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, so I'm originally an East Coaster, and then I moved around a bit. I went to undergrad in Illinois, and then I bopped down to Greenville, Mississippi, where I was a high school teacher at Greenville High School. Go Hornets! Now I do bees, though. And I taught there for 5 years, teaching juniors and seniors. And then I decided to go back to school myself. Went to school at Delta State University. Go Fighting Okra! How about that? Pretty fun, right? Have to include it in every presentation I do. Look at that little guy. Kind of angry. And while I was getting my degree, I somehow landed an incredible job at a USDA pollinator health lab in Stoneville, Mississippi. And that's really where I got my feet wet with the whole native bee thing. And through that job, I discovered a passion for native bees and heard about this position and moved up here in January of 2025. So this job is a perfect mix of human things and bee things, so I really like it. So what are native bees, okay? Inevitably, when I tell people that I work with bees, they get really excited, right? And they picture me in the full suit with the smoke in front of a colony. And then they tell me about so-and-so who raises bees and they get honey. And I say, that is so wonderful. I love honey. I love those bees. That's not what I do. I don't work with those bees. But what I get to say is it's actually way cooler than you think. I work with these bees. And take a moment to look at these guys. I mean, totally crazy creatures. They don't look like what you expect a bee to look like. And that's part of why I love this position is for a lot of people, they don't know about native bees. And so part of what I get to do is share that first aha moment that I had when I looked at that green bee under a microscope and said, what? That looks like a fly. That's a bee? I get to share that with people and expand their knowledge of what bees are. So we're going to set the record straight, okay? Apis mellifera, the European honeybee. When I say bee, this is probably what you're picturing in your head, okay? The classic black and gold stripes, live in a big colony, makes delicious honey, right? So the deal with Apis mellifera is that unfortunately they are non-native organisms. They are not native to North America. They were brought over to the Americas by European colonists, okay? They are originally from the Mediterranean Europe area. But the thing is that for a long time, Apis mellifera has been essentially a domesticated organism. Humans have had a history of breeding and rearing honeybees, dating back to like ancient Egypt, okay? So for a while, they have not really been considered a wild organism. So they are more close to cows and chickens than they are to other wild organisms. And of course they are eusocial. They live in big groups, and that means that they've got a queen who's in charge of that group, and they've got all the workers who do food gathering and egg rearing, things like that, right? That's pretty uncommon in the animal world. And it's not the case for most native bees as well. So this perception that we have of bees as like super social, not really the case. But because of that eusociality, or that big group colony hive aspect, they're really great for crop pollination. Because what we can do is take a colony and plop it right down in the middle of the field at exactly the right time when flowers are in bloom, and then all those honeybee workers can go out there and do the hard work of pollination for us. So kudos to the honeybee, right? I don't work with these bees, but I certainly am appreciative of them because they are responsible for modern agriculture, essentially. But there's way more than just Apis mellifera out there. And native bees come in all shapes, sizes, colors, and there is a shocking amount of diversity in these organisms. And some of these, you would probably look at them and not even think that they're a bee. There are native bees that look like wasps. There are wasps that look like native bees. There are flies that look like native bees. So it really challenges our perception of what we think of when we think of bee. So a little bit about this diversity. I love these images because it gives you a perfect idea of what I'm talking about here. The large black bee is a carpenter bee in the genus Xylocopa, some of our larger bees that we have. And that little tiny girl right on the antenna of the Xylocopa, that's a perdita, a female fairy bee, or what we call those. We call them fairy bees because they're really tiny. And they fly around and they do this little zigzag dance that's pretty cute. So a huge amount of diversity in the bee world. Worldwide, there's about 20,000 species that have been named. That's as of 2023. That number has certainly gone up because we're describing new species all the time. It's estimated that there's between 30 and 40,000 native bees worldwide. In North America, we've got 400,000. Again, that number is going to continue to grow. And here in Washington, we have 600 plus species of bees. I think the last time I checked the official number, it's like 598. And there's a couple undescribed species that we come across. So certainly more than 600 here in Washington. So with all this diversity, what makes a bee a bee? They are vegetarian wasps. Okay, so bees and wasps belong to the same order called Hymenoptera, but the thing that makes them different is that bees, instead of using animal meat like wasps do, wasps are predators. Bees will go after plant nutrition. So they are drinking nectar from the plant, and they're also collecting pollen as a nutrition resource for their young. So these little vegetarians are the perfect pollinator because of that direct relationship with a plant's pollen. We know pollinators to be, birds, moths, butterflies. Wasps will even pollinate, but a lot of that is accidental pollination. They're coming up to the plant to get nectar, and then they're transporting pollen by happenstance. That's not the case with bees. They're after the pollen itself, because that's what female bees collect to provide food for their young. So because of that direct relationship, there are some really crazy interactions that can happen, some really specialized interactions that make bees, in my opinion, the best pollinators. So the life cycle of a bee, and we've got some images here that are most common for our native bees. We'll start up top. So most native bees are nesting in the ground. About 90% of native bees are ground nesters. And the majority of them are solitary, so they don't live in big groups. It is just one female who creates a nest, and she is technically her own queen. So she'll burrow into the ground if she's a ground nester, and she'll create a little cavity where she is eventually going to lay an egg. But before she does that, she needs to go and collect resources for her eggs, because as soon as she lays that egg, she's probably going to seal off that chamber, and she won't ever interact with her offspring again. So she needs to provide as much food as she can so that that egg can develop and become an adult. So she's going to go out and she'll collect pollen on flowers. She'll spend her whole adult life doing this. And in these little chambers, she'll create little pollen balls. She'll take the pollen from her pollen-carrying hairs, which are called scopi. She'll scrape off the pollen from the scopi, mix it with a little bit of nectar, and then form it into a ball and lay an egg right on top. And that's the picture in the far corner. Once that chamber is sealed, later on, that egg is going to hatch into a little larva. That larva will consume the pollen reserves that its mother dropped off for it. And then it will go through a series of developmental stages until it forms into a pupa. So similar to a butterfly in a cocoon, it's going to wrap itself in a pupa and then go through its final metamorphosis. And in this picture, closest to me, that's an adult bee almost ready to emerge from its pupa. They can sort of pause here in their life cycle, and they're going to wait for conditions that are correct for that species. So maybe that's the first onset of spring if it's an early emerger, or it will be timed with whatever flower resources it most prefers. So later on in the summer, if it's an aster-loving bee, then it's going to emerge when those asters come into bloom. There's a lot that we don't know about this life cycle. We have no clue how that happens for a lot of bees. It's incredibly specialized and probably woven into their biological clocks. But when the time is right, they're going to emerge from that pupa as an adult bee. And these are the bees that we see flying around on the landscape. And then female bees will spend their whole life collecting pollen to repeat this process, and male bees will fly around looking for a female bee. Okay? So that's something that all bees have in common. Something that will make them different is how they go about collecting that pollen. So because it's such a direct relationship, it is directly connected to their evolutionary success in laying eggs. We see a lot of different varieties and strategies that bees have adapted in order to collect that pollen. Most often it's on pollen-carrying hairs. Again, those are called scopa. And up the top picture, A through D, you can see some different morphologies and how they might carry pollen. Some of them have really bushy hairs, like in picture D, all the way on the right. Others of them will collect wet pollen, so they'll take the pollen from the plant, mix it with nectar, and then stick it to their leg. That's what honeybees and bumblebees do. And then the location of the pollen-carrying hairs can help us identify what group of bee they belong to. So we've got an andrina that's got the classic pollen pants on, and then we've got a megachilid bee, that's a leafcutter and mason bees. They'll actually carry their pollen right on their abdomen. Not all female bees collect pollen. There are some small groups of bees that are kleptoparasites. And they are the moochers of the bee world. They, instead of collecting pollen for themselves, they will go into the nest of other bees and lay their eggs in their nest. We call them kleptoparasites because they are stealing the resources of other bees. And while that is kind of mean sounding, when we find kleptoparasites in the landscape, that's a good sign because it means that their host bee is in large enough populations that it can support a parasitic klepto bee. Crazy. And bees will also vary greatly in the degree of eusociality or socialness that they have. So we've got the eusocial bees. Honeybees are a great example of that. There are some native bees that are also eusocial. Some of our sweat bees are eusocial. But the majority are solitary. They nest alone, they live alone, they're loners. Then we've sort of got these weird in-between categories. Gregarious bees are bees that like to nest in big groups. You can think of this like an apartment complex. They'll have this big nesting aggregation, but everybody has their own nest entrance. Everybody will have their own little egg chambers to themselves. And then you have some semi-social bees like bumblebees where it's maybe not truly eusocial. Maybe the workers could still lay eggs if they wanted to. It's just that the queen bumblebee would kill them if they did, right? So it's not full differential castes like we see in honeybees and other eusocial bees, some weird tweeners. And where they nest is also highly dependent on the species and that particular morphology and physiology of the bee. Most of them are ground nesters. Some of them like to nest in flat, packed ground like we see on trails. Others will nest in vertical surfaces like cliff walls. You've got cavity nesters, so they'll find a hollow maybe in an old tree trunk or in between some rocks. Apis mellifera, the honeybee and bumblebees are cavity nesters. Then you've got a whole series of bees that will nest in hollow plant stems. Maybe they bore these holes themselves, or they will wait for the plant to die and then find the hollow centers. And then we have a small group that are your carpenters. Sometimes these are pest species because they may live in the eaves of your house. Thankfully in Washington, we don't have a majority of those species. But out in the east, we get people who are complaining about these bees who are living in my eaves. So what's the deal with native bees? Why are they so important? First, I would like to offer up that I think they're pretty rad. Looking at that picture, right, that's an incredible looking organism. But if you're having trouble accessing the magic these days, I get it. Here's some harder facts for you. These native bees provide pollination services in our wildlands. So they're out there in natural landscapes pollinating flowering plants. This is going to increase the local biodiversity of that region, and it's also going to support wildflower blooms. Are there any wildflower lovers in the room? Yep, haven't met someone who said no to that yet. Beyond just natural ecosystems, these guys are also helping out in agriculture. So the reality is that our urban and semi-urban areas are adjacent to these natural spaces. So the native bees do play a role in pollination of our crops. Of course, modern agriculture is dependent on Apis mellifera, the honeybee, but it's undeniable that these guys are out there also supporting pollination services. And there are some crops that honeybees don't like to pollinate that require native bee pollination. And just to put this in perspective, about a third of our food crops require pollination. So that's 1 in every 3 bites that you can attribute to a pollinator. That's billions of dollars worth of money in terms of modern agriculture. So that's native bees, okay? With that in mind, I'm going to talk a little bit about what my project, the Washington Bee Atlas, does. So we are a participatory science effort where we train volunteers to map native bee diversity in the state of Washington. And we are housed in the Department of Agriculture, but we partner closely with the Master Melittologist program. This is a program that's run out of Oregon State University's Extension Service. A little bit about that program. It was an online course that is modeled after the Master Gardener approach. So folks will sign up and take a series of courses and online workshops to become an official master melittologist. Melittology is the study of native bees, so a melittologist is someone who does that. There is a course fee for this. Thankfully, in the state of Washington, we voucher all of our folks who apply for a scholarship because we are a legislatively mandated program. So we have government funding to help train volunteers to do this work, which is pretty cool. And also under the Master Melittologist umbrella is the Oregon Bee Atlas. They're our older sister. They've been mapping bees for 7 years. So we sort of adopted their same model and have been active since 2023 here in Washington. So why do we need an atlas? Why do we need to map where native bees are in our state? Prior to the existence of our program, what someone did at the Department of Agriculture is they went through all of the historical records of bees that were documented in Washington. A huge task. I'm glad that happened before I came on because that is a lot of hard work. They were looking at records from the 1800s, 1900s, and just recording any time that there was a bee documented in our state. They made a nice big list that's super user-friendly. And based on that list, they determined that there are about 600 species. It's about because they said these 500 and so definitely have been recorded in the state. And then there's a handful that were kind of questionable records and some that we expect to find based on records in Idaho or Oregon nearby. They used just shy of 23,000 records or occurrence records to help build this list. And you may think, wow, 23,000 instances of bees being recorded in the state. That's fantastic. Unfortunately, that's not quite fantastic when it comes to making conservation decisions. If you do the simple math, 600 species, 23,000 records, that's about 38 records per species. So 38 times that an individual species was recorded in our state. It's not quite as simple as that. When you remove honeybee and bumblebee records from the picture, your map looks like that. So you can see there's a bunch of gaps in our data. Most of occurrence record, this is ubiquitous across all bee research. Most records end up being honeybees and bumblebees because they're common in our landscapes. And to really drive this home, I want you to take a look at this graph. okay? So this is the most common 100 species of that 600 that was recorded in our state. You'll notice that the lines are not evenly distributed. It's not 38 records for all of those most common 100 bees. There's this group here on the left that we know quite a bit about. We know a lot about these bees. They're really common. We collect them all the time. I have boxes full of these bees. And then trailing on towards the other end of the graph, you'll notice that there's a lot of bees that we have very little information for. And reminder, this is just the most common 100 bees. There's 500 species that aren't pictured on that graph. And for those 500 species, they have 30 or fewer records. And bad news, 400 of those 500 only have 10 records. So that means that they were only recorded up until this point in time 10 times in the state. Those 10 records could each be 10 years apart, right? So we don't have any good long-term data to tell us about our bees. And you certainly can't make conservation decisions about a species that you've only recorded 10 times. You need a lot more data than that to say that this species is in need of conservation requirements. So there's big gaps in our data. There's a lot that we don't know about native bees. What we do know is that bees vary naturally across time and space. And this is for a variety of reasons. Maybe seasonal changes. One year it was really warm, one year it was really dry. Your bee populations will vary depending on those weather or climate situations. There's annual changes. Some of these we don't fully understand. Some years it's a good bee year, some years it's not. Why are the bees there? Why are they not there? We don't know. And then there's all sorts of habitat changes. If those 10 records for a species were in different ecoregions across the state, there's different factors that play into the populations that those records may indicate. So there's long-term trends that impact bee populations, and we don't have the data to understand how those long-term trends are playing out in our natural spaces. So the gist is we don't know a lot about native bees. So our goal in WABA is to understand more. We want to map the 600 plus species that are native here. We want to create county lists to understand where we expect these bees to occur in our state. We want to assess when in the year they're emerging. Are they a spring species or a fall species? And we want to understand what plants they're interacting with on the landscape. There's 45,000 species of plants in Washington. 3,600 of those are insect pollinated. So we want to know what special relationships are they having with our plants. We want to look at other habitat requirements, like what soil types do they prefer? Are they a high elevation species? Is there a certain type of grade in the landscape that they need for their nest? And all of this data we want to provide to conservation biologists, particularly fish and wildlife, to help make conservation decisions and figure out which of our species are SGCN, species of greatest conservation need. Right now, most of our species are SGIN, species of greatest information need, because we don't have a clue about them. And hopefully, along the way, since we're a volunteer organization and none of these people are paid to achieve these goals, we want to have a lot of fun doing this. And so, how do we do that? How do we achieve all those goals, and what does it look like out in the field that our volunteers are doing? In conjunction with their online training through the Master Melitologist program, we host in-person field training events and collecting events where we gather together at a location anywhere in the state, and we'll train up the newbies and spend the day out in the field collecting bees together. We do this not only so that our data is standardized and we all are using the same collection method, we also do this because all of these people love bees, and it's a blast to hang out with people and share in what you do and have a sense of community doing it, right? We absolutely could not do what we do without our volunteers, and I'm thrilled to be a part of a program that's empowering laymen to do the work. So it's a good time. Here is sort of a quick overview of our process. Step one is we go out and collect bees, okay? It's not quite as simple as that sounds. We look for bees on flowers, which requires a huge amount of patience sometimes. And you have to get good with a net. Often bees are really small, and so you definitely pick up some skills along the way. This is our pollinator taxonomist, Karen, showing some deft net movements in her signature pink overalls. And then once we capture a bee off of a flower, we have a special tube that is charged with ethyl acetate. Ethyl acetate is a vaporous substance, and so it will vaporize. And we put that bee in the tube and we kill the bee. Okay, so we do use lethal capture, and I'll talk about why we do that in just a minute. Once we've spent a day collecting bees, we will take a picture of each plant that we recorded a bee on. This is how we get all of our metadata for a specimen. We use the app iNaturalist. Anybody use iNat in here? Yeah. It captures GPS location, time of day, who collected it, all sorts of good information about that collection event. Later at home, our volunteers will pin up the bees, and they'll go into iNaturalist and essentially write down how many bees they collected off of that plant. So they'll count up how many bees in that jar and record that number with our WABA project. And then our volunteers will get mailed specimen labels. There's a couple steps happening between 3 and 4 to make this happen, but that is too in the weeds for tonight. Essentially, they get their labels and they put them on the pin so that all of that rich data that we collected in the field is now attached to that specimen in perpetuity, forever. At the end of the field season, they'll turn in their box of bees, and that is where the hard work of taxonomy happens. We're currently receiving bees from our volunteers from the 2025 field season. And myself and my coworker Karen will spend all winter long identifying those bees. We also train our volunteers to do this as well, so they'll come and attend microscope training sessions. And we've got some folks who have gotten really good at BID, which makes our jobs easier. So, why are we killing bees? How can killing bees help protect them? It's a fair question. I want you to take a look at this bee. That is in the genus Melecta, and there are 2 species of Melecta in the state that look exactly like that. Superficially, you would not be able to tell that they're 2 separate species. The key to differentiating between these 2 species is to look at a spot on their head just below their eye spots. Got some microscope images of what you're looking for to determine these 2 species. On the left, we've got Melecta pacifica, and you'll notice that right in front of its central ocelli, there are these tiny punctures in the integument. And those punctures go all the way up to the margin of the central ocelli, or eye spot. In Melecta thoracica, there is a small triangular impunctate region right in front of that ocelli. To the naked eye, you would not be able to see that. It requires a microscope in order to put a species name on that bee. So pat yourself on the back. You just did the work of a pollinator taxonomist. That's what Karen does full time, identifying bees. This is a case where the identification is possible and actually relatively easy. There are a whole series of bees where the taxonomy has not been worked out yet. The features are really obscure and difficult to see. It takes a lifetime of work to be able to put species names on bees. And unfortunately, conservation can't happen unless we have a species name on a bee. You can't say that, oh, bees are threatened, we need to protect bees, right? You need to say which bees are threatened, which species, so that you can appropriately direct funds towards their conservation. And you need that species name in order to know what habitat requirements they have, so that we can actually do something about their protection, okay? So Fish and Wildlife can't protect bees without that species name, which is impossible to get without a microscope. The good news is there has been a lot of research on how lethal capture impacts existing populations in the landscape. And turns out not all that much. It would be really hard to catch enough bees with a net in order to impact future generations. This particular study looked at the most invasive type of sampling, which is pan trapping, which generates a lot of specimens. And over several years, they did consecutive pan trapping, And each year that they went back, they were still catching the same number of bees, which means that the populations were still thriving despite the sampling efforts. What's also beneficial about lethal capturing is that you have a specimen permanently. Because it's on a pin, because it goes into an insect collection, it can continue to contribute to science down the line. Whereas like a visual observation of a bee can't, right? This is an example of how specimens are continuing to contribute to science. These are the red-tailed lasioglossum, or the red-tailed sweat bees. Right here in Washington State, we've got a taxonomist named Joel Gardner, who is a world expert on Dialectus, this particular subgenus. And because we have specimens in museums, we can continue to redraft our understanding of the taxonomy of these bees. So all of our specimens are contributing to that work of taxonomy that happens in insect museums. And all of our bees that we collect are available as public data. Excuse me. Our specimens technically belong to WSU. We keep a reference collection here in Yakima. I'll show you that in a minute. But I have boxes that are full of bees that I need to send in the mail to WSU, and they'll live permanently in that insect collection. And all of our data gets funneled through their data management platform, which is Ecdysis. So that means you can go to ecdysis.com and you can look up WABA bee data, which is pretty cool. All of that live bee data is then available for researchers to take a look at and write some papers about. Here's a look at our reference collections down at the office. We're keeping enough here in Yakima so that Karen can use that reference collection to continue to ID incoming bees, but everything else gets shipped to WSU to be maintained there in perpetuity. And insect museums kind of act like libraries. That means that other museums can check out specimens and get material on loan so that taxonomists around the country and around the globe can compare and make sure that we're all calling the species the same name. And we have permits that allow us to do this lethal capturing. We've got a scientific collecting permit across the state that's been issued to us by Fish and Wildlife. But we have a series of specific land permits that allow us to do this work in some really cool locations around the state, including national parks. This summer, I went to Olympic National Park for work for 2 days and collected bees. It was incredible. And we've got a whole series of private and public lands that we do our work on. And included in this list this year was Cowiche Canyon Conservancy, which was pretty fun to do some hometown collecting on. So taking a look at this year, in 2025, we had 144 active volunteers with WABA, and they logged more than 3,500 volunteer hours, which is incredible. And we collected over 20,000 specimens. And that number is quite a bit over. It's actually 29,000 and some. About 4,000 of those were grad student bees, so around 25,000 were collected by volunteers. So that means that we more than doubled our previous program effort between 2023 and 24, and we more than doubled the historical data available for Washington. So that means that we're generating a lot of data that can help us understand the baseline status of the bees in Washington. And because we collect floral association along with our bees, we identified more than 900 host plants for our species. So we know what they're out there collecting pollen from. Pretty incredible work. And because of all of that extensive effort, this year we were able to release sort of our first new list of bees. So these are new and rare bees that were just documented in our program years. That's available online, and I would encourage you to check that out. There's some pretty weird and funky bees included on that list. So some future goals for us beyond just generating this baseline data. We want to start taking some bee DNA. You can snip off a little tarsal segment and then run DNA sequences on bees. We didn't know that we could do that 50 years ago. So insect collections that are existing from the past are continuing to benefit science through DNA technology, which is cool. We also want to start scraping off the pollen from the scopal hairs of the bees. That way we can know exactly which plant species the female bees are going to collect pollen from. We've got some interactive map tools that will launch in March to help us visualize this bee data. Excited about that. And we want to do some ecoregion assessments and figure out how can we make some seed mixes to support pollinators in those ecoregions. You'll often get a pollinator packet of seeds at gardening events or any nature-oriented outreach table. Trouble is, a lot of times those seeds aren't native, and so you're not actually contributing to the pollinator food bank in your area. And we just sent over a big report to WDFW so that they can continue to make conservation assessments about these bees. So that's WABA, okay? The business is taken care of. Now is the fun part. I get to tell you about some bees, all right? So in 2025, we collected at Cowiche Canyon Conservancy lands. And great news, y'all. CCC is ripe for bee biodiversity. How do I know? Well, first I can look at their website and I can say, wow, that looks pretty good. That looks like good bee habitat, right? Yeah. Beyond that, right, there are multiple types of habitat on CCC land. So you've got the lower canyon that's got the creek, you've got the uplands, and then you've got Snow Mountain Ranch. All of those different elevations are providing different floral resources, so that means different bees at each location. Arid ecosystems boast higher bee diversities than wet ecosystems. So because we're in a semi-arid area, that means high bee biodiversity. If you're wondering why, that's because most of them are ground nesting, and fungus is the biggest enemy of a ground nesting bee. So semi-arid areas are better for bees. And CCC lands are protected from development. So that means that existing habitat is there for the bees. So we did 7 collecting events throughout the summer of 2025. Some of you may remember Bran Romero, who was the former JVC volunteer at CCC. He sort of led the charge with this and helped organize these events. We generated over 720 specimens, and 30 bee genera were represented in those 720 specimens. As of right now, 101 species were identified and 58 unique plant hosts were identified. I say as of right now because those numbers technically only come from Bran, myself, and Karen's bees. We have a lot more volunteers who helped at those collecting events, and they have until March to get their bees into me. So there's more coming. And unfortunately, it takes a really long time to identify bees, so I wish that I could tell you about all 101 of those species, but that would take forever, and there's still bees that are being identified. So I've chosen sort of 3 unique snapshots of the data to help give you an idea of how WABA occurrence data is helping us understand native bee populations. So we'll take a look at 3 bees, one that was caught in Cowiche Canyon, one that was caught in the uplands, and then one that was caught at Snow Mountain Ranch. So first up, this is our Cowiche Canyon bee. This is Anthophora crotchii. And this was caught in the canyon on a couple different plants, narrowleaf mountain trumpet and Door's sage. What you'll notice is that bee has a really long tongue. And so these guys like the tubular flowers. So you'll see other variety of Anthophora on ribes, so your wax currants and your golden currants plants often. But what I like about this species is it's relatively rare, so we were excited to find it in the canyon. But males of this species are super easy to identify. The females are quite hard to identify, but the males on their mid-leg, they've got these crazy little fans. Those little bristle hairs that you see at the bottom of their leg. They sort of look like Egyptian fans to me. And they've got these wild yellow maculations on their face. And we're not totally sure what those little fans are for, but we suspect that they're probably for mating or recognition. So somehow those fans help that male bee look fancy to the females he's trying to attract. So very cool to find that in the canyon. That was on our list of 25 new or rare bees. Second up, we're hopping up to the uplands. Bran caught this bee, which is Osmia van Dijkii. So Osmia are mason bees. They're the blue metallic bees that are really important for orchard pollination. And this particular species is a weird one because we don't know what the females look like. We only know what the males look like. And the males are really easy to ID because they've got these clubbed antennae. And so those little expanded last flagellar segments. So maybe we caught a female, maybe we didn't. It's really tough to know. And you might be wondering, Caleb, how do we not know what these female bees look like? Well, when you use the keys to identify bees, specifically the osmia bees, you wind up at all sorts of other species except for Van Dykii. So then that means that there likely are Van Dykii that we caught, but they're just being ID'd as a different species. So our key is broken, and the key needs to be reworked. And how you rework a key is you look at all your specimens that you think might be Van Dykii, and you make as many observations as you can and compare them to other material. And Karen, who has spent her whole life identifying bees, has looked at these bees and says, I can't see any differences. So we know some species that may likely contain Van Dykii, but we don't know yet. So that means that this bee is a good option for DNA technology. If we snip off a tarsal segment of a male who we've positively ID'd as Van Dykii, we can run some DNA sequences and get a DNA barcode and then compare that to possible female Van Dykii, and then hopefully be able to look at those specimens and figure out some definable difference that allows us to see what makes Van Dykii. So pretty cool. Unfortunately, this bee was caught at large, so that means that we don't have a floral association for it. It wasn't caught off of a flower. And that's actually pretty common for male bees because they don't go to flowers as often. They're not collecting pollen. They just nectar on flowers. And so this guy was probably just caught chilling on the ground. So we'll need to do more surveying next year in the uplands to continue the search for the female Van Dykii. And then lastly, this is my favorite scenario. This is at Snow Mountain Ranch, okay? Have any of you been to Snow Mountain Ranch? Okay, great. So you may recognize this map. So the map on the left, you'll see that big sea of the Columbia Basin rye, right? So this is right as you cross over the creek and see that big field of rye. We caught several specimens of this bee called Didasia acrotia, the ochraceous chimney bee. We call it this because it has bright yellow hairs. And they're called chimney bees because they're ground nesters, and they'll make these little turrets or chimneys in their nest. And that is to discourage predators and parasites from entering the nest. And we've got several Didasia in our state, and 3 really small species. We've got Didasia nitidifrons, Didasia acrotiae, and Didasia diminuta. What's cool about these bees is that they are eclectically oligolectic, all right? And what that means, oligolectic, it means that they go to a few flowers for their food source. You could compare oligolectic with monolectic, which would be a specialist. They're only going to one plant source. Or polylectic, which would be a generalist bee. It goes to a lot of flowers, right? These guys are oligolectic, meaning they go to just a few types of flowers. And their specific brand of oligolecty is eclectic because they only go to a few flowers that are within the same plant group. So they are only going to Malvaceae plants. So these are globe mallows and hollyhocks. And in Washington, we know that these 3 species can be expected to find on globe mallow, but what we are seeking to understand is what is the exact food relationship that they have with these plants. The little bee on the orange flower, that's Monroe's Didasia. That is pictured on Monroe's globe mallow. We're fairly certain that that bee is highly specialized to that plant, okay? But the other 2, Didasia nitidifrons and Didasia acrotia, we weren't sure if they also went to Monroe's globe mallow or if they were able to use other types of Malvaceae for their food source. Turns out they do. And we recorded Didasia acrotia at Snow Mountain Ranch. It was the first time that we caught it for our program. And it was all over the stream bank hollyhock. which was pretty cool. I also caught nitidifrons at that same site, and I think I caught Didasia diminuta. I need to go back. I don't trust my own ID, which is pretty common in taxonomy. So I need to look at those bees a little longer and decide if I did. And my plan is I also want to go back in 2026 and see if I can find some nesting grounds as well. So we were really excited to find these bees. They're super charismatic. They have these little domed heads, and they're really fuzzy and tiny. So if you're at Snow Mountain Ranch, look for the hollyhock right there at the stream crossing, and you'll see these guys in June and July. Pretty fun bees. So how can you support native bees? Okay, first of all, you can sign up to be a volunteer with WABA. If you are interested in what you heard tonight and you would like to go out in the field and survey bees and help us out with our efforts, I've got all sorts of information that I can give you over there. We are always accepting new volunteers, and I can guarantee you that you'll have a blast. If you know that you are at capacity and you're not up for going out in the field and killing bees, no problem. You can still support. Washington has its Native Bee Society, which is a great organization to be a part of. They do monthly meetings about different bee topics, and we work closely with them to partner and conserve our bee species. Some more practical things here at home. You can create bee habitat, so planting flowers and making sure that you have floral blooms across the whole bee season, so spring blooms and summer blooms and fall blooms. By doing that, you are providing food resources for bees in urban areas, which is where bees have the hardest time. Okay, so helping to create and protect that habitat, and supporting organizations like CCC that are protecting existing habitat, that also helps protect our native bees. And lastly, I would encourage you to stay curious about bees. By understanding more, you can know how these bees are interacting with wild landscapes, and by knowing more, you can do more, right? So stay curious. Next time you're out on a hike, look for these little guys, look for those bright green bees, look for the bumblebees, look for all of our native species that are out there on our flowers. And if you are interested in doing that, I will be leading some walks in the spring at CCC, so I'd love to have you along on those walks. And that's it for me, y'all, okay? I am excited to take some questions. I hope you have lots of questions. And I've got my contact information there. So if I don't get to a question tonight, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to chat anytime about bees.
Thank you, Caleb.
Yeah.
That was beautiful.
Thanks.
Bees are amazing.
They are.
So the plan tonight is that we have about 20 minutes for questions, and then we're going to leave a little time because we only have this room until about 7:30. So we're going to leave a little time for folks to chat with Caleb over in the corner if you're interested in getting involved or just have questions about the Bee Atlas for a little more one-on-one time. So if folks have questions, this is a little bit of an informal process here, but feel free to raise your hand, and I'll run around and find you and try to keep your questions succinct and in the form of a question, and I'll get to as many as we can in 20 minutes.
Are you planning to do any surveys up at Conowalk Pass?
Where is Conowalk Pass? I'm new to the state.
Go ahead.
It's just north of Wapato on the.
Okay. Is it in
Ridge.
Forest Service land?
No.
No.
It's CCC.
Oh, it is? Oh, yeah. You told me about this. Yes. I am planning to. Yes. Because apparently there's globe mallow there?
Yes.
A lot.
Okay, great. Monroe's?
Yes.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Yes. I do plan to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a weirdly thriving globe mallow
Super.
population there.
That means there's bees.
Yeah. Okay.
Are there other staff doing this same work in other parts of the state? And if so, where else?
Yeah. So there's only 2 staff members, me and Karen. But then we have volunteers all across the state, in almost every county at this point. So we've got 145 active volunteers out there doing bee work. So most everywhere, yeah.
I noticed you, in one of your slides, you excluded honeybees and bumblebees.
Yeah.
Could you talk to us a little bit about bumblebees and how they fit in to the whole
Absolutely.
scope?
Yeah. So we've got 31 species of bumblebees, around 30 species of native bumblebees in our state. The reason I excluded them from the data is that traditionally bumblebees are well surveyed. And it's because they're really charismatic. People love bumblebees, right? So they want to know about bumblebees, and bumblebees get more money than a lot of other native bees. So as it stands right now in Washington, we know quite a bit about those bumblebees. We do still collect bumblebees because we're creating floral association data, which can help conserve populations of bumblebees. But we do limit the amount of bumblebees that we try and collect, mainly so that we don't have so many that we have to deal with in our collection. We can get lots and lots of boxes. But also because if we know enough about them, there's not as much of a reason to be out there surveying populations. So we do have 3 species of bumblebees in the state that are SGCN. One is the western bumblebee, Bombus occidentalis. That's the one that was super abundant in the landscape 20 years ago. You'd go out with a net, every 3rd bumblebee you caught was Bombus occidentalis. It was everywhere. There was a greenhouse situation in California. I encourage you to look it up. The population crashed. We're not exactly sure why. Thankfully, we think that they're maybe doing better. I've caught a couple. I've seen a couple. So they're out there. Our other 2 SGCN, one is the parasitic bumblebee that was a parasite off of the western bumblebee. That one has not been observed in years. It's likely that when the western bumblebee population crashed, the parasite population also crashed and likely didn't recover. And then the 3rd one is Bombus morrisoni, and I believe that it's only been observed in Ellensburg within the past 30 years. So questionable as to how good that population is doing. Not sure. But the other bumblebees, they're doing fine. They're great. They're everywhere. Cute as ever.
I have a question
Yeah.
for you, Caleb. I think you talked a little bit about it, but can you talk about any surveying you guys have done in like more urban environments?
Yeah.
So not necessarily like large tracts of
Right.
habitat, but very broken up habitat, or
Yeah.
anything interesting to report?
Yeah. So we have a lot of data in urban areas because our volunteers like to collect where they live, right? They can go out in their back door and collect in their backyards if they want to. So in urban areas, you tend to see lower levels of biodiversity, obviously, because there's not as many floral resources or available habitat. But you see lots of the common stuff. So things like your sweat bees, your bright green agapostemon, they really love urban or semi-urban areas. And that's likely because they are generalists. And so they'll eat whatever, right? So if you've got flowers in your garden, they're going to be there. And they'll nest in those areas as well. So that's good news for our common bees. For your less common bees, you probably won't see them in urban areas because they have more specific habitat requirements. And so you would have to specifically grow that plant in order for them to be present there. So that's why it's super important to plant native plants in your garden, is to attract those bees. But it's okay to have non-native plants as well, because the generalist bees in the area, they love that too, right? If you've ever seen a lavender bush, it's probably buzzing with bees. Yeah.
Is there any negative interaction between honeybees and native bees? I mean, do they coexist well, or are they?
Yeah. That's a great question. The question was, is there negative interaction between honeybees who are non-native and native bees? That's a really difficult question to answer, largely inconclusive. Some studies say there's not so much. Other studies think that there maybe are. Even if there is, the reality is that honeybees are ubiquitous in our landscape because of their presence in agriculture, and we deeply need them in agriculture. They're the reason that we have fruit. So in terms of integrating native and non-native bees, it's about supporting both. How can you support honeybees and also support native bee populations as well? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, watching things on news and everything,
Mm-hmm.
what about the killer bees in our area? What's the scoop with that?
Yeah. So killer bees could refer to some different things, right? A few years back, we had the giant Asian hornet in the state, which has since been eradicated. So it's no longer out there predating on honeybee hives. But then you might also hear about Africanized bees and those bees being killer bees. Africanization, it's not a different species of honeybee. It's just a trait that exists in the gene pool of honeybees. So there's a certain degree of Africanization genes existing in any given colony at any given time. Thankfully, for us in Washington, the big killer bee swarms, they are much more common in the Southwest, and they're likely not to happen here because of the complex biology that's going on with those genes. But yeah, it's still a potential, as are, a number of other concerns that exist with honeybee colonies. We had a really bad year with honeybees because of varroa mites and diseases that were passed. Because they're a eusocial organism, they pass diseases frequently in the same way that large human populations do, right? So you can get some crazy things happening in honeybee hives. Yeah. Did that answer your question? Okay, good. I have to admit, I know very little about honeybees. It's all native bees for me. There's only so much room in my brain for bees, and I've got a lot of native ones to know about. That's right, yeah.
The species that you only have males, how do you know that they're males?
Oh, great question. How do we know if a bee is a male or female? Male bees have 13 antennal segments, and females have 12. Males also have 7 abdominal segments, and females have 6. And only female bees have stingers. So if you see a stinger, it's a female. Male bees don't sting. They're not interested. They're out there to find a female, right? They don't need to protect any eggs or something like that. So only the females sting. And oftentimes the male genitalia will be exposed. And so that's another way that you can tell that it's a male.
Mm-hmm. Do native bees, I feel like I always heard that honeybees die when they sting you. Do native bees die? Do they lose their stinger or something if they sting?
Excellent question. No, they do not die, and they can sting you more than once. But the good news is that they are less aggressive than honeybees. So honeybees have a barbed stinger, and that's a trait that they've evolved because that gives a more painful sting, and it allows for more venom to be injected with the sting, which would benefit a large group, right? The individual workers are willing to sacrifice their life to protect their queen. That's why honeybee stings hurt so bad. Native bees are not as aggressive. They're not as willing to get into a tussle because there is more for them to lose, especially if they're a solitary bee. She is out there collecting pollen for her nest, and so she can't afford to be getting in fights all the time. And she also can't afford to die if she does end up in a situation where she defends herself. So native bee stings are quick, and they are a small prick, and then the bee flies away, and it's more of a shock than it is painful. Yeah.
Allergies then?
Yeah.
That bee sting.
Yes. So if you're allergic to honeybees, you're likely allergic to native bees as well. It probably wouldn't be as severe of an allergic reaction because there's less venom. Yeah. So still allergies to the bee venom.
Are there plans to integrate native species into agriculture?
I'm so sorry. Where are you? Oh, yes.
I'm over here. Sorry.
I was looking for you and wasn't listening. I apologize. What?
Are there plans for generalist native species to be integrated into agriculture?
Yes, great question. It's already happening. So some plants are not pollinated well by honeybees. An example is alfalfa. Alfalfa has this really weird part of I think it's a stamen or stigma or something. A part of the plant, of the flower, pops out and punches the bee in the face. And honeybees don't like it. But there are little megachile or leaf-cutting bees that don't mind. Turns out they can take a punch in the face. So they are better pollinators of alfalfa, and we already use managed populations of these bees to pollinate alfalfa fields. Sometimes you'll see like little shacks on the side of these fields that have nesting blocks because they're tube nesters. And so those are populations of alfalfa bees that have been brought in. There's several other species that are either currently managed for agriculture or being looked into as potential managed species. So great question. There's a lot of work going on to do that.
No. I was just curious that question about the male and the female. So do you actually have to catch it and look at it carefully under the microscope to be able to tell?
So it depends on the genus or sometimes the species. There's a whole tribe of bees called the Eucerini tribe, and they're named the longhorn bees because the males have really long antennae, like visibly much longer. So those, a quick glance, even on the wing as they fly by quickly, you can tell if they're male or female. But often it requires a specimen under the scope to see.
I think we've got time for about 2 more questions.
Wondering how the no-mow may is that more for honeybees or is that more for native bees or both?
Both, yeah. I mean, it's certainly benefiting honeybees. Honeybees love clover. It may also benefit generalist species that live in urban areas, things like sweat bees. What no-mow may is not doing is helping specialist bees or really rare bees because they likely wouldn't go to clover. But it's helping bees, so cut the mowers off in May, y'all.
So Caleb, you've told us many stories of these matriarchal societies, or at least the solitary bees where the females playing this key role of passing on to the next generation. Can you give any stories of where the males have any important role other than reproduction?
Let me think about it. They fall asleep in flowers, and it's really cute. I can give you that. I'm sure there are. Yeah, and especially in eusocial situations, there's some groups where the males don't even emerge from the nest. But in the bee world, it's all about the ladies. Yeah.
That's a great place to end.
I think it's a great place to end. Yeah.
Thank you, Caleb. All right. Be safe, everyone. If folks want to stick around for 15 minutes or so, you're welcome to chat with Caleb and hang out.
Come and grab some merch.
Merch.
Hey,
I'm Marty.
I'm Caleb.
Yeah,
Nice to meet you.
Good job.
Thank you. Yeah.
Would you recommend, would it be valuable to have a cutter bee board at home in an urban setting to try to for a habitat?
Yeah, it would be.